All right, squaddies, let's get straight into it, because what we are witnessing right now goes far beyond headlines, far beyond polite palace briefings, and far beyond the carefully choreographed language of royal sources. This moment, this so-called jam diplomacy, is almost surreal in its simplicity and yet deeply revealing in its implications, because somehow, incredibly, a jar of strawberry jam has been elevated into a symbolic barrier, an explanation, we're told, for why genuine reconciliation between Prince Harry, Meghan Markle and the wider royal family continues to stall. And when you really sit with that, when you strip away the spin and the soft language and the endless layers of justification, what you're left with is not a serious argument, but a pattern. One that has repeated itself over and over again, evolving in form but never in function. Because this was never about jam, it was never about commercial sensitivity, and it was certainly never about protecting dignity. At its core, this has always been about control. Control over narrative, control over perception, and ultimately control over a woman who stepped outside of the structure that once defined her role and refused to be diminished by it. What we are seeing is an institution grappling with something it was never designed to handle. Independence that does not collapse under pressure. The expectation, as it has always been, was simple and almost scripted. Leave, struggle, fade, and eventually return seeking validation. But Meghan did something that disrupted that entire cycle. She left, she built, she succeeded, and she did so publicly, visibly, and without asking for permission. And in doing so, she didn't just walk away. She exposed a fundamental vulnerability in a system that depends on the belief that its approval is essential for relevance and success. So now what we are left with are explanations that grow increasingly fragile, increasingly strained, shifting from weighty justifications, interviews, media deals, memoirs and security concerns into something almost absurd, where even something as ordinary as jam is framed as a legitimate obstacle to family connection, as though success itself has become a disqualifying factor rather than a point of pride. And that is where the deeper truth begins to emerge, because the real concern here is not the product, not the optics, and not even the headlines. It is the possibility of a narrative collapse. It is the fear that if Meghan were to return to the UK on her own terms, confident and unrestrained, she might be received not with hostility but with warmth, not with rejection but with curiosity, and perhaps even admiration. And in that moment, the carefully constructed image that has been projected for years could begin to unravel in real time. Because if that happens, the implication is unavoidable and deeply uncomfortable, that the situation was misjudged, that the portrayal was incomplete, and that the public, when given the full picture, might arrive at a very different conclusion than the one they were guided toward. And for an institution built not just on tradition, but on perception, that kind of realization is far more destabilizing than any business venture could ever be. Meanwhile, the reasoning used to sustain this narrative simply does not withstand scrutiny, because the idea that proximity equates to endorsement, that presence translates into promotion, collapses the moment it is applied to ordinary life. It is not how the world works, and it is not how people think, and that disconnect is precisely what reveals the artificial nature of these justifications. But beyond all of this, beyond the strategy, beyond the optics, beyond the endless cycle of explanation, there is a human reality that cannot be ignored, a quiet but profound cost that continues to accumulate with every passing day. Because at the center of this are two children, growing up in real time, experiencing the steady passage of moments that cannot be paused, delayed or reclaimed. And every missed visit, every postponed reconciliation, every decision shaped by image rather than connection is time that slips away permanently. And that is where the narrative shifts from ironic to deeply serious, because no amount of control, no carefully managed perception, no adherence to protocol can replace the simple, irreplaceable value of presence, of relationship, of shared experience. So ultimately, squaddies, what we are witnessing here is not about jam, not about business, and not even about public opinion. It is about a fundamental choice between control and connection, between preserving a narrative and embracing a reality that has already begun to evolve beyond it. And as the excuses become smaller, more specific, and increasingly implausible, they begin to do something unexpected. They stop convincing and start revealing, exposing the very dynamics they were meant to conceal. People are watching, people are questioning, and more people are beginning to see the pattern for what it is. And that is why this moment matters, because sometimes it is the smallest, most trivial justification that exposes the deepest truth. And in this case, no matter how it is framed, no matter how carefully it is presented, it is becoming clearer with each passing day that this story was never and will never be about jam at all.